Okay, so we're going to talk now about care of the adolescent patient. First of all, physical growth and development. When we talk about adolescence, we think about puberty and about massive, rapid changes in body and also in thought process. So you need to know the definitions of these stages, okay? Prepubescence is a time of preliminary changes and a growth spurt. So prepubescence, there's a growth spurt and they have some early changes of secondary sex characteristics. Puberty is defined as menarche in girls and sexual maturity in boys. And you can look at the Tanner scale for what the different stages of those changes are. Post-pubescence, 1 to 2 years after puberty, skeletal growth completes and reproductive function regulates. So what you need to know is about 2 years after that child reaches sexual maturity, they stop growing. Okay, so for girls, that's earlier than for boys because they reach puberty earlier. Primary sex characteristics are the development and function of reproductive organs. Secondary sex characteristics are facial and body hair, patterns, breast development, voice changes, and patterns of fat deposits. Okay. So think about the middle school boy looking for armpit hairs, things like that. Those are secondary sex characteristics. Primary sex characteristics are going to be the enlargement of the genitals themselves and the beginning of reproductive function. There are hormone changes that trigger all of these physiologic changes. The hypothalamus secretes stimulating hormones. Remember, the hypothalamus mostly secretes hormones that go to other endocrine glands that cause them to secrete other hormones. Those hormones trigger the pituitary to create another set of stimulating hormones. Those hormones go to the gonads and the adrenals, and they stimulate the production of gametes and secreting sex hormones. Okay, so there's like 3 steps to all these hormones, which means more places for there to be an upset. There's a general sequence of sexual maturation. If you look in your book at the Tanner stages, providers are going to examine a child and identify their Tanner stage 0, 1, 2, etc. You're not going to be asked to do that. I want you to understand what is meant by the term Tanner stages, and I want you to understand the general sequence of maturation for boys and girls. For boys, their testicles enlarge, and then they begin to develop pubic hair, axillary hair, and then facial hair. They have a rapid increase in height, their voice changes, and the penis grows. They begin to have nocturnal emissions, and then they have a slowing of their height growth. Okay. For girls, they develop breast buds, and then they have a rapid increase in height and weight. They develop pubic hair, axillary hair, they begin to menstruate, and then they have a sudden slowing of their height growth. So know the general process. Physical growth, about 20 to 25% of height is achieved in adolescence, mostly in a 2 to 3 year period. Children often grow so quickly that they develop stretch marks from that growth. The neck and the extremities grow first, and then the hip and chest growth, and then the shoulders widen, the trunk lengthens, and the chest deepens. So that's why, though, when you get that growth spurt, kids often look long and gangly because their arms and their legs and their necks grow before everything else, and then other things start to catch up. Also, because of that rapid growth, middle schoolers often don't know where all their limbs are, and they're still trying to figure out, so they tend to be clumsy. They're falling over everything because their legs and their feet weren't where they were yesterday. That growth spurt begins earlier in girls most of the time. Frequently about 7th and 8th grade, the girls are all taller than the boys because they had their growth spurt earlier. The boys grow more like 8th, 9th, 10th grade is when they get a lot more probably 9th and 10th is when they get a lot more of their growth. Boys begin growing later, but they tend to continue growing longer. So on average, at the end of the growth spurt, they are taller than girls. The vocal cords and the larynx enlarge. So boys and girls both get deeper voices, but that's more pronounced for boys. Lean body mass grows steadily through adolescence. There's a less orderly progression of fat deposition. Some kids get pudgy before that growth spurt. Girls develop characteristic fat depositions. They get hips, breasts, buttocks, all of those things. And those things actually tend to, even though girls' height growth stops about 2 years after menarche, in their 20s, a lot of women get some additional typical fat deposition, their breasts may grow some, their hips may widen some, their buttocks may grow some. Obesity can accelerate the onset of puberty. So children who are obese are more likely to develop early puberty. Boys on average develop more muscle mass and greater mass and greater strength. And muscle development is connected to testosterone. So when boys hit puberty and they get that testosterone, that's when their muscles develop and they become stronger than the girls. Some other physiologic changes: the sebaceous glands are more active during this time. That leads to blackheads and acne. There's also an increase in both eccrine and apocrine sweat glands, and it's the apocrine glands that are responsible for that odor. I don't know how many of you have had middle schoolers, but there is a particular odor that is common. Even if they shower, that odor comes back sooner, and it's different from the odor of a fully grown adult that you're going to get in adolescent, in high schoolers. Middle schoolers, it's because those apocrine glands are just starting to function. Some of them haven't quite figured out that they need to use deodorant yet. And so middle school classrooms, there's kind of this stereotype that the classroom's always stinky. And for some reason, they always want to have middle school sports or athletics early in the day. And so the rest of the day, those kids have to go through the day with that odor. So what can you recommend for kids who are experiencing that? Well, if they don't get time to shower, which frequently they don't, they can take a stick of deodorant, have a stick of deodorant in their bag or their locker, and a stick at home so they can have some extra deodorant after athletics. The size and strength of their heart increases. Their blood volume and blood pressure increases, and their vital signs and blood elements all reach adult levels. So there's a lot of physical changes that happen in just a few years. After puberty, kids' bodies function very much like adults. Okay, in the next section, we'll talk about developmental theories and adolescence. There's a lot going on there as well.